I'm Chris Moyer, and this is a Zpryme Now special report. Over the last month, much of the media's attention has focused on the heroic efforts of medical professionals to battle the coronavirus pandemic. However, just behind the scenes, society's ability to respond to this crisis effectively depends on utilities. The imperative to keep the lights on and the heat on has never been stronger as customers shelter in place. To discuss how utilities are keeping the power, water, and natural gas flowing for residential, commercial, and industrial customers during the worst pandemic our planet has faced in the last 100 years, I'm joined by Badar Khan, the president of National Grid US. Badar, thank you so much for being here today.
Chris, it's great to be here with you and with Jan.
And Jan Vrins, we're also joined by Jan from Miami, Florida. He's the Global Energy, Sustainability, and Infrastructure Segment Lead for Guidehouse, a management consultancy firm focused on supporting utilities during a business model and energy transition. Jan, thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Chris. And we were just talking about my teenage boys, and one of them just was printing a document here in my office. But other than that, I'm doing well.
Well, that's the now we know what it's like to be on Saturday Night Live. This is live television right here. So
right.
A quick notice to all of our audience. Thank you so much for joining us today. We encourage you to ask questions in the chat box at the lower right-hand corner of the window. We will do our best to get to as many of your questions as we can during the conversation. So let's dive in. And we're going to talk about the initial response that utilities and society are facing. Utilities have been improving resiliency and developing business continuity plans for decades, but this pandemic presents very unique challenges. Badar, how has National Grid's culture that emphasizes reliability allowed you to respond so effectively during this time of crisis?
Yeah, Chris, I think that keeping the lights on and the gas flowing is such a big part of our purpose. And as you say, it's been a part of our and the utility sector's purpose for decades. When I talk to and connect with our folks across the business over the last month, our people knowing that our customers and our communities can rely upon us for the lights being on, for there to be heat, when they really don't know if they can rely on anything else, is genuinely a source of pride. And it's a source of pride that's throughout our business, whether it's our frontline employees who are out in the field or folks in our call centers and our offices supporting our frontline workers. So, that culture permeates our business. And as you would imagine, we do any number of preparations for reliability events. Up here in the Northeast, it's about storms. We have storms all the time, and so we know what we need to do to sort of step in and restore service during the storm. But we as a company, we rehearse scenarios that are beyond just storms, so cyber attacks, high levels of absenteeism. We had a pandemic plan that we activated in this instance, and it's working out quite well for us.
Jan, one of the great strengths that utilities have is their ability to do that long-term planning that Badar was just referencing. COVID-19 does not have a direct impact on grid assets or the utility asset writ large. What are some of those unique steps that utilities are taking to respond to the pandemic as opposed to a traditional emergency response?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And as we all know, utilities for many decades have dealt with events, take weather events, as Badar was mentioning. We see those actually increasing every year over year. We went from 5-6 major events in the U.S. to like 12, a major hurricane, a major wildfire, major winter storm, earthquake. So I think utilities have prepared very well and very diligent around these. Glad to hear that National Grid actually did a pandemic test as well and dry run for that. Many utilities have. Although it doesn't have a direct impact on the grid, it definitely have a huge indirect impact on the grid. And if you think about continuity of operations, I live in a neighborhood, and next to my neighborhood there's a hospital, right? So extremely critical that that hospital has electricity and has the energy to provide their services to their patients. So I think utilities are so critical. A colleague of mine, Dan Bradley, called them, heroes without capes, because they keep the critical infrastructure and continuity of operations of so many things going, and make it also easy for us and all of us. And with the stay-at-home advice, we have a lot of people working at home, able to continue to do our job and communicate and have meetings and conversations like this. So I think utilities are doing a lot. The other thing is that the industry is in the midst of a larger transformation. So utilities are doing all this, keeping the lights on, safety, reliability, keeping the costs down in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of tornadoes that ran last weekend through the southeast. We had an earthquake in the Pacific Northwest, and then we have a larger energy transformation going on where the way we use energy and the way we produce energy is changing as well. So my head goes off to the utilities that are doing all this in the midst of so many changes and so many threats.
Well, Jan, I'm really glad that you brought up those compounding crises like tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes. The Northeast and the Midwest had significant windstorms last weekend, and we will get to that. But I do want to focus on those initial responses. And Badar, what you mentioned the planning that has gone into this, but what unique steps have National Grid taken to operationally respond to COVID-19?
Sure, Chris. I mean, we have, like many companies across the world, we've activated remote working. So we've got 8,000 people working from home today, and that includes our call center folks, people that are answering calls from customers from home. We've taken all sorts of steps where we've got essential activities still going on in the field, where we're sanitizing and cleaning our operations, sometimes multiple times a day for high frequency areas. We've set up all sorts of services to respond to concerns from our own employees. But probably the one thing that we've done that is perhaps a more unique versus other companies or other sectors is that we've sequestered a couple of hundred employees at our transmission and distribution power and gas control and generation control centers. And so by that I mean employees who are working and living on site, either in cots in the offices or in trailers beside the offices. And these are people who are sacrificing time away from their families. They're accompanied by some food service employees and technology employees to ensure that they're reading and their equipment's working, and they're on shifts. They're either 2, 4, 6 week shifts. And I can tell you that there is a tremendous amount of pride for what these folks are doing across our organization, and not just in our company, but we're getting an incredibly strong support from our community, from elected officials who've done videos and or letters that they've sent in to our people. And I think that's probably the key thing that we've been doing. And again, it comes back to our, everyone in our company and utilities across the country just understand that our customers and communities are relying upon us to be there when there's so much uncertainty elsewhere. So that's probably the one thing that is the most unique for our company versus other sectors.
Well, I applaud every worker at National Grid, whether they are sequestered or working at home, and across the country and the world. But for those workers that have taken the extra burden of separating themselves from their friends and their families to go work in the distribution, transmission, and generation control centers, thank you to all of them.
Thank you, Chris.
National Grid has operations across 3 states, and those 3 states are some of the hardest hit areas, not just in the United States, but in the whole world: New York, Massachusetts, Rhode Island. What steps are you taking to work with local, state, and federal government officials to effectively coordinate an emergency response?
Yeah, I mean, clearly we're working very closely with our regulators in each of our states in New York, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island around how we can best support and serve our customers, and particularly those that are most vulnerable. So low-income customers in particular. We have, like every other utility across the United States, work with regulators to suspend collections and disconnection activity during this time, which I think has been very welcomed by many of our most vulnerable customers. In New York, we've actually delayed an increase to an increase in rates that had been planned as part of a prior rate case. Clearly we're working with federal stakeholders on the stimulus package and the dialogue that's taking place at a federal level. And there we're mostly focused on increasing the LIHEAP funding. So this is funding for low-income customers because energy bills are such a high proportion of their income than other sectors of society. So we're really very focused there. And at the state level, with all of our stakeholders, we're working with them to ensure that the critical projects that we have in our operations to ensure that power is flowing and power is on and gas is flowing for this coming winter is still able to get done. And able to get done in a way that maintains social distancing, allows our people to be able to wear and have the right level of protective equipment to protect themselves and the public at large. So there's a tremendous amount of very strong coordination going on there.
Yeah, and you just heard Badar mention the LIHEAP funds and some of National Grid's efforts across 3 states to coordinate with local and state and federal officials. What are some of other examples that you've seen of utilities doing particularly effective coordination with their respective governments?
Yeah, I think at the local level, and Badar touched on that as well, we see utilities working with local governments, cities, around some of the hotspots now, not in terms of the virus, but in terms of the critical operations and infrastructure that's needed to attack this virus. So new hospital centers that are being built up from the ground, test centers that are being implemented, critical manufacturing, and we need all the resiliency and redundancy and backup that we need to keep those operations going. So that's really at the very operational technical level with local authorities and governments. And then the upper end is really, I think, very interesting discussions that are going on. And again, it will be part of this this series to talk more about that, Chris. But what do we do as we recover, as we restore, as we get back to the new normal? But because I don't think we'll ever get back to what it used to be in terms of how we manage the electric and gas grid, if you will. I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of new solutions coming available for us as well. But interesting discussions about build back better, build back stronger, and in Europe specifically, in other places as well, obviously. Build back more sustainable and greener. So is this a time for us now as an industry to not only address COVID-19, but also think about, another big threat that's still out there called climate change and align our investments as we come out of this phase to, climate change as well. So there are some very interesting discussions between the industry utilities and international and federal governments around the world.
Let's drill down just a little bit on those frontline emergency medical professionals. None of their work can be done without the exceptional work that utilities are undertaking to make sure that the power comes on. Badar, what steps are you taking to work with hospital systems in your area support them as they work to combat the pandemic?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think it's just important to understand that culturally, a lot of our people consider themselves rightly as close to first responders as you can get, and so there's an incredibly strong affinity for and support for the healthcare here of today. So across our footprint, we are working with all the hospitals to do the kind of things that Jan talked about, which is setting up temporary hospital capacity, setting up testing capacity. We've worked directly with hospitals to accelerate the kind of work that we might otherwise have taken longer to do and do in a period of a few days. So talking about things like a gas meter upgrade for ensuring that there's heat at an athletic center at a local facility so they can accommodate temporary beds. So there's that kind of activity that we're doing. Our people are very engaged and supporting hospitals, whether we're donating PPE equipment as we've done to Tufts in Massachusetts, or our own employees donating lunches for healthcare workers, as we've been doing in downstate New York, in Long Island. But also I would say there's a set of indirect activity that we've been engaged, pointing and directing our economic development programs that we have in our, for example, in New York, we announced last week that we found and assisted a tech company called PVA, which makes sort of high-tech. It's a high-tech manufacturer, but they started pivoting towards making essential equipment. So in this case, it was emergency resuscitators. Our economic development program found the company and accelerated fast-tracked a grant program to provide them $35,000 to continue in their mission. So it's indirect activities as well as direct activities. And again, it's a real source of pride for our people to be able to help these healthcare sectors.
Thank you again for that work supporting the additional frontline responders, those medical professionals.
And Chris, if I may just chime in here a little bit, in Guidehouse, I lead the energy, sustainability and infrastructure practice, but we also have a healthcare practice. So we are actually working with our healthcare clients, to help them coordinate also with federal government. There's so much pressure on these organizations right now. So you have the normal inpatient flow is pretty much non-existing. You have all COVID. So they're struggling tremendously with their finances and obviously with their procurement and supply chain. So we have teams embedded at our clients there as well to really coordinate with state and federal governments there as well to just help out. And we have a Guidehouse, and even within my practice, we actually have a lab, and it's for some of the work that we're doing for the Department of Energy in Burlington, in Massachusetts, in Badar's territory there, and we actually donated masks that we usually use for the lab to the local hospital there as well. So we're just trying to contribute wherever we can as well, Chris.
Thank you, Jan. To shift our focus just a little bit, both of you have mentioned the importance of working with customers at this time, and I did want to bring in question that I have and a question from our audience. We have several good questions from our audience at this time, and we will work to get to all of them. But on the subject of customers, James, talking a little bit about utility assets, how deeply is National Grid evaluating new technologies that digitize our communities through utility assets to expedite our path towards stronger connectivity and information sharing? And that I want to tie in with another question that we have, Badar. With all of these shelter-in-place orders across the country and the globe, and residential customers having to spend more and more time in their house, electricity and gas consumption patterns have dramatically shifted. What resources are National Grid using to communicate with your customers, keep them safe, and ensure continuity of service?
Yeah, I mean, I think clearly identifying the most vulnerable customers and prioritizing them, whether they are residential customers, so people living in homes or apartments, or small businesses that are struggling, clearly because of the economic fallout from this crisis, is a big priority for us. And we're looking to, and we have executed as many channels as we can possibly come up with. So we've got a dedicated microsite, one for residential customers, and we're developing one for small business customers. Clearly, we're emailing our customers, and I think a fourth or fifth email went out in the last couple of days. We're writing to our customers. We've got social media activity that are trying to direct customers towards locating services that can support them. So we talked about the federal funds, but there are a variety of other support packages that are being made available through the CARES Act and through states to support individuals. And we're trying to, and small businesses, we're trying to find ways to direct our customers to those efforts through any channel that we can. I think it's important to point out that we're talking about the healthcare sector. You know, one sector that is directly helping customers are those most vulnerable are food banks. We've been making direct charitable donations to organizations that are supporting food banks directly. And I can tell you, in my conversations with folks in all of our states, they need all the help that they can get. So anything that we and others can do to promote supporting food banks, again, that are directly helping those most vulnerable, I can't emphasize enough.
That's a great point, and I think that preparation to help beyond just the public health portion of this crisis, the food banks are going to need help for a long time. Jan, are there best practices for utilities in supporting customers during this challenging time? And I also want to ask a follow-up question to that related to the impact on demand as we move from, as C&I demand has gone down and residential demand has gone up. What are some of those steps that utilities can take to effectively address those challenges?
I think some of the best practices that utilities around the world are using, and Badar mentioned a couple, evolve around, I think, sympathy, empathy, consideration, understanding, where your customers are. So we've seen utilities, collectively agree to not disconnect anybody. There's even some utilities that have actually reconnected people that were disconnected before the crisis started. Payments, things like that. So I think there's a big part. I think the second area that we're starting to see, and it ties back to the second point that you mentioned in terms of what does all this do to demand and loads across the grid, where obviously we're seeing a tremendous shift to residential, where people now, because of the stay-at-home order, spending a lot of time with their total families and using a lot more energy. So I think we're seeing some programs that utilities will do also with the summer peak, coming up to keep energy usage down and to limit the impact on the bill for the low-income customers, as Badar mentioned as well. So we would like to see a lot more there. I think using some of the smarter technologies, smart devices, smart thermostat, smart meters. But even certain programs, demand response programs, if we could use some of the stimulus funding to help fund those programs, it's a win-win-win. It's a win for the federal government, because I think it's an economic boost, because it will jobs or keep jobs we have in that sector. It's a win for utilities. They can help their customers and manage the grid in a way that it will actually optimize cost and improve power quality and reliability, and it's a win for the customer. So hopefully, there will be discussions about how some of the stimulus funding and recovery funding in Europe will be used for customer programs and really manage through this time, manage through the summer, but then have a long-term impact, I think, in terms of reduced usage, which I think will be good for the system overall and the customers.
Well, energy efficiency will certainly play a crucial component of this in the summer and winter months to come. We had so many great questions. Thank you all. But we did have a question about shutoffs, and National Grid and utilities around the country have committed not to shut off power for any customers during this difficult time. Badar, how are you working with low-income customers and individuals? And there's more than 22 million of them in this country that have lost their jobs as a result of the economic turmoil caused by COVID-19.
Well, it's exactly as Jan was saying. It's both the suspending collections and disconnections, so the shut-off activity. It's through all the channels that we can, both digitally and physically, direct customers to the various elements of support that might be available through the CARES Act, that might be available in states to support customers. It's, as you heard, it's the energy savings tips, the energy efficiency programs that customers might be able to access. We're reaching out to customers to related to payment arrangements. So we're waiving down payments for payment plans. We're extending terms on payment plans. All the things that you expect to see us do to try and support those customers that are struggling the most, we're putting in place, and that applies again to low-income individual customers as well as small businesses.
We are.
Chris,
Yes, please go ahead.
yeah, sorry to jump in here. With regard to residential usage, so we've seen usage going up anywhere between 10 to 20% around the world. If you now take the summer months here in the U.S., typically the summer bills go up by $40 to $120 per household. If you take 60. The bills go up by 250 over the 4-month summer period. We think we can save 40 to 120 million of that, $120 of that. If you do that times 60 million, you're talking about a lot of savings. In the $2 billion to $6 billion savings that we here in the U.S. only should take a look at. I'm not saying we will be able to unlock all that, but there is a huge opportunity for utilities to work with their customers over the summer. Again, using some of the stimulus funding, it will create jobs. It will use the technology that we've installed over the last couple of years. It will reduce the bills, and that will be significant savings for all. So there are some big numbers out there in terms of potential if the federal government and the state governments want to work with the utilities to go after this opportunity.
Well, I think that's a very worthy project, and even if utilities are able to actualize 15 or 20% of that savings, that will certainly help their customers, and it will help them from an operational perspective. We are running up at the end of the program, but I did want to talk briefly about keeping employees safe and then setting a vision for the future. And so, Badar, you mentioned this in your earlier comments, but what steps is National Grid taking to ensure that the health of their workers, particularly in that essential control center operations area?
As I said already, we've sequestered employees at our control centers, and that is to ensure that we're able to keep the lights on and the gas flowing for our customers, but it's also to protect the health of our employees. Clearly, as we are rotating shifts through those control centers, we do testing of all the folks that are sequestered, so that we understand whether someone actually might have an infection or not. But outside of those control center areas, we've suspended non-essential work both in the field. We've suspended non-essential work in customers' premises. So the kind of energy efficiency audits that we would normally be doing, we aren't doing. Where we do have employees going into customers' premises, we work very closely with them to ensure that they've got all the guidelines around preventing exposure to either the public in their homes or vice versa, back from customers back to our employees. We're sanitizing and cleaning our operations where we do have essential work going on in the field. So there's just a vast number of different programs that we have, efforts that we have in place to ensure our people's health is protected. And I think the aspect of people's health that we just can't forget is mental health. I mean, this is a situation that has just turned everyone's life upside down. We were saying before the call started, in all of our calls, we ask each other, how are we doing? And I think that has a different level of meaning, from a very quick answer to one that actually people spend time reflecting on and talking about. I think that we show each other kindness today. We're cutting each other slack today. And I see that across our company, and I see that with folks outside our company in other sectors. I think that we have people that talk about, we use the phrase, we get through this together. And I have genuinely seen extraordinary resilience and acts of selflessness where people are putting others ahead of themselves. So that's not just the healthcare workers, it's folks, as we've talked about in our company and utilities around the world, but people who are genuinely trying to support each other. And so I see tremendous togetherness and support. And I think that's the key to getting through the situation that we're in today.
Thank you, Badar. Jan, what would you say to Americans and people around the world who are scared about the pandemic right now?
Yeah, I think we're all scared. At the same time, we're all pulling together, as Badar said, to flatten the curve, which is really good to see. We are in this together. Tomorrow is Earth Day, and I'll make a little bit of a pivot here to Earth Day, but we have a bigger a problem ahead of us, which is called the climate crisis, which potentially might have even a more devastating and bigger impact on our economies going forward. And I hope we all understand that if we work together, because we're all connected, we can actually have a huge impact on managing through these type of crises. And whether it's COVID-19, whether it's a hurricane down here in Florida, or whether it's the larger climate crisis, I believe if we all work together, since we're all connected, we can actually flatten the curve for many of the crises and work through them. It's going to be the new norm. It's going to be the new reality that we're in, and we better get used to it. And I think we have strong governments and strong companies, including National Grid, that are supporting, getting us through these type of crises, and we're becoming together more resilient to these.
Very well said. Badar, I'll give you the last word. Is there a message of hope that you would like to share with utility employees and people around the world?
We've summed it up already, that we will get through this together. I've seen a level of collaboration inside the company that has allowed us to do things that none of us had planned. Being able to have thousands of employees work from home, being able to work so closely with regulators, elected officials, other stakeholders, support our employees and our customers in ways that I don't think anyone would have expected before. The extraordinary acts of kindness and generosity that we're seeing throughout society. I think these are all examples of people across the world, in our country, our company, and across the world working together. And it genuinely makes me feel proud.
Well, thank you both. And thank you to our audience for your questions and participation. We couldn't get to them all, and I apologize for that, but I did try to work as many of them as I could into the questions that I asked. I will say that Zpryme will work to follow up on each one of these questions in some articles over the next week or so. So do come visit zpryme.com and we can work to answer those questions. Jan, I want to thank you for sharing your expertise, and Guidehouse for sponsoring this 3-part series. You can tune in to parts 2 and 3 in May and June. But Jan, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. That was great.
And Badar, thank you. And a big thanks to all the National Grid employees and all the utility professionals around the world who are working so hard to keep the power on.
Thank you, Chris. Pleasure to be here.
This has been a Zpryme Now special report. I'm Chris Moyer. Stay safe, stay positive, and know that better days will return. Thank you.